Welcome to this second podcast of the four speeches. Today we'll look at the opening speech and the strategy of naming and the importance for the leader to be a sort of poet. I'm Bård Nordheim.
And I am Joar Haga.
Joar, who do you think said the following words? I've fought against white domination and I've fought against black domination. I've carried the ideal of a democratic and free society in which all persons live together in harmony and with equal opportunity. It is an ideal which I hope to live for and to achieve, but if needs be, it is an ideal for which I'm prepared to die.
Well, I would guess Nelson Mandela.
Well, that's right, but do you know when he said it?
If I should guess, in one of his inauguration speeches in 1994.
Well, that's the interesting part. It was actually 30 years earlier in 1964 at his trial. But later he repeated the same words, the end of his 1964 speech in February 1990 when he had just been released from prison. So this was Mandela's first public speech in 27 years delivered at the parade in Cape Town.
I did not know, but it's impressive, isn't it? To stay true to the original vision you outlined in that manner.
Well, talking about the importance of vision, some people would say that there's everybody's got a vision these days. You have, if you're just a small city somewhere in an isolated part of Norway, have this a vision, or everyone should have a vision. And I just read a book by Otto Scharmer and Katrin Kaufer, and Leading from the Emergent Future. And they said that one of the three myths of leadership is the need for creating and communicating a vision. So they said that rather than creating and communicating a vision, the leader should be listening. We need a listening leader. That's what we need in what they describe as the 4.0 or the ecological era of leadership. So what do you have to say to that?
But listening is important, isn't it?
Of course.
If you're only talking about visions and something you've made up in some night hours or during your poetic hours of the day, shouldn't you try to listen to what people have to say about how things really are?
Of course, I think, I know of leaders who've said that when they enter into office, they would say, well, the first 100 days of my career as a leader, I would be doing nothing but listening. But in some sense, I have this feeling that this is a bit confusing for those listening, actually listening to the leader. So what's the problem here with just saying that I'll be a listening leader? At some point, you have to say something else than that.
So what you're pointing at is that listening is necessary but at some point you have to transfer or to interpret that listening into a speech, that you have to say something.
At some point you have to put yourself forward and say that this is my, or you have to name something. That's the word we're using to. You have to say something that people have to relate to and say that, hey, do I believe this guy? Do I think that he or she has something compelling, incredible to say?
Well, that fits very well into our project, doesn't it? That a leader is also leading by speaking. That he needs to say something in order to be a credible leader.
He or she does. And I think this is particularly interesting when you look at leaders who are given or take leadership in times of conflict or insecurity, which is usually the most interesting. Then you can't just say that when there's a crisis ahead that we'll spend 100 days listening and the next speech we'll listen to, then it's a big point that in 99 days or in 100, it's too late, because then Britain will, it's 31st of October, so we'll just soon listen to Boris Johnson's first speech as Prime Minister. And whatever you think of Boris Johnson, it's an interesting example of how a leader addresses this situation of what do I say at this point? How do I describe reality? So let's just listen to when Boris Johnson, he pays the usual courtesy of thanking his predecessor, but then right after that, listen to what he says. This is his speech from July 2019.
But in spite of all her efforts, it has become clear that there are pessimists at home and abroad who think, after 3 years of indecision, that this country has become a prisoner to the old arguments of 2016. And in this home of democracy, we are incapable of honouring a democratic mandate.
So, why does he start in this way? It seems rather aggressive, I would think.
Yeah, well, the really appealing aspect of this speech, seen from a rhetorical perspective or seen from a leading perspective, is to see how he doesn't come up with solutions. He doesn't speak about his visions or he doesn't name anything he wants to do. He just he sort of sums up what the critics have said, and so he sort of portrays the dark skies of prophecy that his and the party's critics have said, and whether there's a truth in it is not so important. But this is the way he names them. Or he names the critique indecision. The country has become a prisoner, he says, and that we are incapable of honoring the no to Europe given in 2016.
So in some sense, he appeals to some of the things that Britain would boast about, that we're an old democracy and all of that. And if we're Britain, then that's sort of the underlying thing here. So if you want to stay true to Britain, we need to do this and that, or that's maybe an underlying story. I was thinking of what would be the parallel if you were a business leader and you would be in a similar position. I mean, he's a political leader. He's taken over a country where he describes as indecision for 3 years. There's been forth and back. And let's say if you were a business leader taking over a company where there's been a lot of insecurity, strategies here and there. What would it look like if a business leader taking over? What should he or she do if she would deliver an opening speech in a company you take over?
Yeah, well, let's compare it to, for example, to a decision that has been forced upon a company to leave. For example, like the merge between a car maker like Renault and Nissan. So let's say the people in France just they have decided to leave this cooperation, and then the critics would have said this is going to be far costlier than we thought, and then when you take over such a company in the position of leaving a strategic alliance, then you have to understand, to address the fears, or you can leave it out. You can just say, well, I have a vision so and so.
But is it a point that he sounds a bit like not necessarily a war general, but by taking the challenge right ahead, there's a signal of courage, sort of. Yeah.
Yes, he's a brave leader, isn't he? Yeah. But just listen to what he says about being a prisoner, being incapable, that this country is in a state of indecision. It's something that can be fixed.
Yes.
So it's not he doesn't portray the most depressing critical comments. He is more addressing a critique that can be met. It's similar to what Sir Winston Churchill made, the comments he made in Parliament, namely that this is going to be very costly, but we can win it.
Yeah, so the suffering ahead might be worth it in some way.
Exactly.
Yeah. So when we describe this as a strategy of naming, we speak of first in the first point in naming is naming yourself. And obviously in inauguration speak or opening speech like this, a prime minister or a president like Obama, they wouldn't need to name themselves because they're named by being put where they are. So, but sometimes if you're a new leader to a company, you'd have to say a few words about yourself, or in some point put yourself out there, or make a name for yourself. If you're too eager doing that, we'll come back to that. That may be a real disaster. But the next mode or step in naming is what Boris Johnson does here. He tries to name reality, and he tries to name it as indecision, not staying true to what Britain is about, or all of that. So
yes, he is by referring to the critics, and the critics. Well, the critique of the policy of the Tory party, he is actually capable of giving the listeners a credible view or credible idea of what reality is. This is where we are now, and he is not sort of speaking sweet about what the opportunities are. First, he is giving this insistence that we are in a dire situation.
So in a sense, he's a poet. When you name reality, you have to. The leader has to be a poet. That doesn't mean writing poems necessarily, but he has to come up with words and say this in a manner. And this stage, he chooses the strategy of being the courageous poet in some sense. And we'll soon listen to what his next step is, because he starts with the critique. And the second step is a slightly change of mode. And we'll listen to that. And it's really interesting because the next thing he says is the following.
And so I am standing before you today to tell you, the British people, that those critics are wrong. The doubters, the doomsters, the gloomsters, they are going to get it wrong again.
Come on. And so I'm standing before you today. I mean, see my God here.
Well, yeah. What he says is actually, I'm going to tell you something different. So he is going to refute the claims.
So that I'm standing here before you today is a sort of a signal that, listen up, something new is coming. There's a new day dawning. He could have said, "Good morning, guys.
Yes,
I'm here with great news about." The break of a new era.
Yes, he could say, "Let the day begin."
Yeah,
and the
morning has broken.
Morning has broken. This idea of actually he is
the inbreaking of the new. Yeah.
Well, he's chosen as a new prime minister, but in fact he's just continuing the Tory policies in a slightly different manner, and he is framing this as. In light of the response of this country to all the turmoil it has been through history. So when he says the doubtster, the doomster, the gloomster are going to be wrong, he's actually tapping into this this country's great history. So he's envisioning a very powerful future and a history to meet that future.
Do you think? The sort of the national or the mythos of Britain, it's an island, it's sort of an outsider mythos. I mean, we're not from Britain, but you're sort of tapping into that by we're going to stand against the rest of the world sort of thing.
Exactly, and they have this you don't have to be post-colonial to see that the empire strikes back here.
Yeah.
And he's actually crafting that image of Britain as a sort of an exception to the rule, namely that this country can stand for it on its own feet, and it can sort of fight the world.
Because of its great history.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And he's tapping into this story of being the oldest democracy. We will perhaps hear that later in his speech, and it's a very powerful metaphor.
once again, if you were a business leader and you do not have the sort of all the power of being the office of either the president or the prime minister, how should you signal this new thing? You could, if you have sort of the new leader of a mediocre firm of some size, what do I know? And if you say, and so I stand here before you today, guys, there's a danger here, isn't it?
Yes.
You have to sort of find the fine-tune, tempered use of words depending on what sort of firm you're leading. Don't you think?
Exactly, and what you're referring to is that the pompous, the extravagance of tapping into too great metaphors, wouldn't make the argument credible, and that's the problem of you have to find the right sort of the right level
of metaphors, and also find the. So we see, for instance, that in typical political speeches, very often prime ministers and presidents would use landscape metaphors because they're huge. They have a great potential. It's the soil. It's the big thing. So if you're a new school director, or if you're leading up a new smaller firm, you have to find fittable metaphors if you want to. And not appear maybe too biblical, as this reference is actually a biblical reference. And so I'm standing here before you today. It's like Moses, isn't it?
Yes.
So Boris Johnson can do that because he's the Prime Minister of Britain.
Of Great Britain.
Of Great Britain, indeed. but that's different. So
yeah, well, and if you look into his framing of democracy, it's about the United Kingdom. So this is not for other historians. The fusion of democracy and kingdoms would just appear not credible. But this is what happened in Britain, namely that under the auspices of the sovereign leaders, democracy as we know it appeared, and it was then exported to the rest of the world. So he has some credibility in what he's saying.
Yeah, and maybe that to find the true greatness of the thing you're going to lead, and that might be looking at a small thing and saying that, hey, we might be. We know that what comes to mind now is the press conference in the film on Love Actually, where Hugh Grant plays the British Prime Minister, and we might be a small country, but we have David Beckham's right foot and left foot, and then he brags about the small things, and it's sort of this ironic thing. But I think for a leader to find these things that people would nod and say, yes, this is what makes us great, and I think that's for some people it might be surprising things, but that's the poetic element of naming reality and saying. The leader is able to say, yes, here's a thing that really makes this entity, this thing, great, and makes it stand out.
Yes, and you are actually pointing to a very important ingredient in this source of rhetorical leadership, and that's the pride. Where is the pride of this company? Where is the pride of this country? Where is the pride of our tradition? And I think
tradition means the things you're going to hand over, isn't it? So
yes,
what are the things the legacy that's what makes this thing worth being and worth passing on to someone else, isn't it?
Yes, and the great thing about the democracy tradition which Boris Johnson represents is a specific understanding of freedom, and this freedom is a recurring theme, not just in Britain, but also in all the political speeches in the United States, which in a way is the export article of
the beacon of
Britain.
Freedom. You would often hear as he used. So the first part is then the critique, where Boris Johnson shows his or wants to appear as the courageous, brave leader when he tackles the challenges and the critique of the predecessor head on. And then the second part, which you just heard, is the more the sort of the refutation, where he sort of says that I'm standing here before you today, and the doubters, the doomsters, the gloomsters, they're all going to get it wrong. And now let's listen to the more sort of constructive part, where he's naming a new future and naming the way ahead, making new claims and a poetic attempt to name the new reality.
The people who bet against Britain are going to lose their shirts, because we're going to restore trust in our democracy. And we're going to fulfill the repeated promises of Parliament to the people and come out of the EU on October the 31st. No ifs or buts. And we will do a new deal, a better deal, that will maximise the opportunities of Brexit while allowing us to develop a new and exciting partnership with the rest of Europe, based on free trade and mutual support.
So, even Roosevelt he refers to, with the New Deal here. It's pretty ambitious.
Yes, he handles the metaphors with great care, because what is at stake here is, of course, Great Britain's relation to the most important political institution in post-war Europe, namely the European Union. So when he's leaving, he has to sort of envision a different future that is credible, seen on the background of the critique he has just mentioned and his refutation of that critique. So now here comes the new future, and I think the key word here is opportunity.
Yeah, and he wants to maximize the opportunities.
Yes, and whether that is credible is, of course, hard to say, but that is his metaphor is closely connected to that idea of opportunity. And in the following arguments that he gives in his speech, he just exposes what it means to have these new opportunities in the new relationship with Europe.
And you'd see, in my mind, the latter part of what we just heard, he wants to maximize the opportunities of Brexit, and now comes this turn to the 100 days. I said that the leader who would say that for 100 days I would listen, he does quite the opposite. He now appeals to the sort of character of Britain in a way. We're not someone who will wait for 100 days. Let's hear this.
I have every confidence that in 99 days' time we will have cracked it. But you know what? We aren't going to wait 99 days, because the British people have had enough of waiting.
So, in my mind, this is an appeal to, if you're from Great Britain, you're not someone who would wait another 99 days. We're better than that. And it might be seen as the third step, the third mode of naming who we are. So saying that those I'm addressing now, the audience, you, the British people, you're tired of waiting.
Yeah, it is often referred to as populism, this appeal to, well, we've had enough, we've waited long enough. But the flip side of that argument is that in a democracy where the markets sort of function on their own, then you can actually appeal to people and say, well, do your best, and the result of it will be sort of the best for everyone. So in a way, his argument is tightly connected to this old commitment to democracy as a force within the political life itself. He is not a Vladimir Putin who will then envision a particular future for the people. He's not an authoritarian leader, or at least he doesn't want to be
appear as one. Yeah.
And he wants to be seen as just making it possible. The word opportunity is, of course, a word that has been very, very well used in American politics. And it's one of the great successes of this concept that that the political authorities, they are just trying to envision a future where the people can decide for themselves. So I think this is some of the engines in his speech.
So basically, I think what he's doing is he's creating a bond between himself and the audience in these first 3 steps of naming. As we spoke about, the first step, naming yourself, is he doesn't spend time on that because it's obvious who he is. But at the same time, he has to appear to them as the new prime minister, as the one who's taking the lead. Then the second mode, naming reality, is where he's trying to convincingly name reality in a poetic manner and saying that, hey, well, this is how it is, or at least I put this forward to you and you have to listen to me. And then it's this third step of saying, hey, this is who we are. And you'd see that in all inauguration speeches by presidents. And I think even for a business leader who's taking over a company, he or she would also have to do this sort of creating this bond in the beginning of between himself or herself and the audience.
Yes, and often the way or our judgment of whether a speech is credible, if it's successful or not, is the way that these metaphors are envisioned or developed into to tightening this bond between the speaker and the audience. So whether it is
sort of an ethos pathos element connecting, yeah.
Yes. So whether it's plausible that the listeners, the people of Britain, will actually
follow this man,
and follow and say, well, yes, through Boris Johnson, I think we will have larger opportunities than
maximized opportunities.
They are. He is actually giving us a new deal.
Yeah. And so for the leader to remember, then first naming yourself, naming reality, and then naming who we are. Having done that, it's interesting that the next step in his speech is sort of picking up on what he does when he does the refutation. And so I'm standing here before you today. And then comes another point where he again signals this new thing. Listen up.
The time has come to act, to take decisions, to give strong leadership and to change this country for the better.
So this is sort of saying, now is the time. Now, this is a filled moment. It's happening now.
Yeah, and we will have to understand the decision element here on the background of his predecessor, and who made very sincere and strong attempts to
Theresa May. Yeah,
Theresa May. Yes, she tried actually to decide and to make decisions, but they were again and again refuted in the parliament. And so he says, well, this is the opportunity to do the opposite, namely to make decisions that will actually stand.
Yeah.
So and take action in a more qualitative sense.
So, but this signals a new mode. We're not going to listen to what comes next, but here he starts describing lots of things that my job is to make your streets safer, make sure you don't have to wait 3 weeks to see your GP, and protect you and your parents from the fear of having to sell your home. And so he lists up a lot of things that will be sort of his program. And that sort of signals a new mode in an opening speech. So we've had these first three modes of naming yourself, naming reality, and then naming who we are. But now we're at the heart of the purpose of what people usually expect from an opening speech, naming a course, naming a course of action, a direction. So what is really the purpose of the opening speech?
Now, the opening speech could be seen as an attempt or a situation where the leader tries or aims to persuade the audience that this future that I'm now telling you, this is something you want to fight for and give your best to, something that is even worth suffering for.
Yeah, and then you need a grand narrative at some point, don't you? So something that's, as we've talked about this earlier, depending on what sort of entity, what's the thing? Is it Britain? Is it a small printing company? Is it a new media center? Is it a school? You have to find fitting metaphors for the thing you're leading.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And although some people, for example, Barack Obama, taps into his personal biography, telling his story, it is not sufficient, because you have to expand and say something with the story that you're telling that says something about the future. It's not enough giving some glimpse about your own story. You have to direct your whole narrative into the future, because these what you want to create is a story that is large enough to give hope and direction for the people you are leading, the nation, the company, the club, or whatever.
Yeah, whether it's a football club or whatever. So you have to, in some point, you have to name what we call the legacy of this club, nation, or whatever, and point out why that legacy is worth your passion, your suffering,
Exactly.
Your dedication.
The legacy itself is also unstable. It has to be interpreted anew.
It's up for negotiation.
Yes, because you cannot just repeat what they have said before. Yeah. You have to know it, to know what you are there for, and interpret that in light of the new situation.
Yeah. So in some sense, it's like Jesus' words of saying, "You've heard it been said, but I'm saying to you today." So in some sense, you have to refer to the tradition, but you also have to bring in something new. Is that right?
Yes, and you have to adapt to the actual circumstance. And what Boris Johnson is saying is that this is a time where we have a limit ahead of us. So now it's time to take decisions. And this is the way that he's doing this is to refer to the great tradition, but it's a part of the democratic tradition. It's not the part that sometimes the democracy from Athens is referred to, namely as a club of endless discussions.
Yeah.
The time has now come to do something, to take action.
Yeah, and I think that if you look at the whole of Boris Johnson's speech and also many other opening speeches or inauguration speeches, you'll see that it's very important to do these first 3 steps of naming yourself, naming reality and naming who we are, but also then to weave these things into the main part of the speech, naming the cause, which is both naming the large cause but also small things. He speaks about the welfare of animals. He speaks about many minor, but what appears to be minor things. But then at the end of the speech, he picks up again and he says, as we prepare for a post-Brexit future, it is time we look not at the risks, but at the opportunities that are upon us. So then it's sort of connecting the beginning of the speech with the end of the speech.
Yes, because the risks that they are implied in
reference to an opportunity. Yeah.
The critique is that we run. The stakes are high. We might lose in this game, in this world championship of competing nations. But what Johnson is trying to convey is that victory is at hand, and that it is possible for the people as a whole to win. It is, so to speak.
Victory is achievable. So
exactly.
Yeah, and he ends also by putting himself on the stand and saying, I will suffer for this. His last words are, we in this government will work flat out to give this country the leadership it deserves. And that work begins now. I mean, Pompeo again, thank you very much, he says. But again, it's an attempt to connect with this idea of we're in a critical situation. I appeal to all of you to join in, to be dedicated, to suffer for this cause of being true to Britain, and this government will give their very best. And
I think it's very important what you say about suffering at this point.
Yeah.
Because you are the cost of breaking with the EU might be less if the goal, the final goal, is a better society. And then you might be able to actually
sacrifice a few things.
Sacrifice, yes, and be able to suffer for it and fight for it.
Mm. And that's even, I would imagine, true for a company or an NGO or an organization. If you're entering into a new era, or if there's a challenge of transition, a crisis, for the leader then to say that, to address heads on, this is the reality. Try to name this in a credible and compelling manner. And then it unleashes an poetic energy for the leader also to name the cause. If he's named the reality in a way that the listeners would say, hey, well, this is compelling. And this is also, you also pointed compellingly to what's the great things in the legacy. Then you can more easily lay out your course.
Exactly, and the important thing is to connect then to the actually felt to give a precise and credible description of the dire situation that you're in. For example, for a company, it might be the economy. That
it's the economy stupid, as Bill Clinton said. Yeah.
The economy might be very, very difficult. You can, but the idea or the point of a leader giving his opening speech is that she or he has to tackle these challenges in such a way that although it might cost, it might be hard, it might imply
sacrifices
and sacrifices, a bright new future will appear at some stage. Then the crucial element is whether you can find something in the legacy that is actually explaining,
you can activate or can sort of bring up this energy that you need for your dedication and suffering. So before we wrap up this podcast on the opening speech, next podcast will be about the executioner speech, which is
it's a terrible speech.
Well, you really need to name things in the right manner, but we'll save that for that podcast. Is there anything else we want to add on the importance of the opening speech?
I think the opening speech invites the leader to use his most poetic and most precise literary resources in order to craft a credible naming structure, both of who you are as a leader, what the situation is, and where we are going, and why. And this is, if it can be not Pompeo, it doesn't have to be Boris Johnson, but the way that these metaphors are grafted, if they are grafted well, and if they're crafted in a sense of powerful speech, then they can be repeated. And that is what's so great about the opening speech.
Yeah, because the opening speech is something, well, you give it once, but you keep repeating it, because whether it's a lunch meeting or it's the yearly meeting with stakeholders, whoever, you sort of have to repeat your original vision, maybe in a slightly revised manner, but you have to convince them that this is what we committed to at the starting point, and this is what we're continuing to commit ourselves to. And then I was thinking of body language. I mean, different speeches require different modes of your register of body language. I mean, you have to own this and embody it yourself, obviously, but I can feel as I'm saying this, I'm sitting up, trying to be sort of more an opening speech manner myself. And don't you think that that's an important factor in the opening speech, to find that sort of mode of both body language, well-tempered metaphors, which fits the leadership you're entering into, and also the legacy you're tapping into?
Yes, but I think one of the great things about if you have metaphors that you really believe in,
it'll change your body language.
You will change your body.
Yeah, you will stand up straight.
Stand up and you will say, "This is what we are."
So that's a way to test. If it's a really good metaphor, it'll make you stand up.
Yes,
it'll make you,
it will make you brave and courageous.
Yeah, so test whether,
and it will appear so. Well,
so if it makes you look down in your iPad, for God's sake, and I'm looking into the camera now, never use an iPad when you do when you deliver a speech. So if it makes you really proud and you think, well, I'm going to fight for this, then that's probably a good test. Don't you think?
I think so.
Yeah. Well, to sum it up, a few things about the opening speech. First of all, you need to name yourself. You need to tell the audience who you are, and then it's key as the second mode to tell the audience what time it is, sort of. The time is now, but you do that by naming reality in a credible way. And then the third mode of naming is telling the audience who we are, appealing to the legacy, whether that's a small legacy, but you can point to the greatness in the small things. And then you use that to draw out a compelling vision that's worth suffering for, a legacy. And maybe you need to find your metaphor, the metaphor that makes your body stand up and that makes you proud and courageous. And finally, we didn't talk much about that, but it could be a good idea to make people remember your last words. Say something in the end that people would, in the opening speech, well, I don't remember all of it, but I remember the beginning and the end. Don't you think?
Yes. For example,
flat out. I think that's sort of low style in a sense, but people remember that when Boris Johnson said that.
Yes. Or maximize opportunities.
Maximize opportunities. And then finally, the idea of the opening speech, in some sense, it never ends. You constantly repeat your opening speech, whether it's over the water dispenser in a conversation or whether it's a lunch meeting. You have to stay true to the opening speech you outline. It has to be something that you're worth following up day by day. So thank you so much for listening in. This was the podcast about the opening speech, and the next one will be about the executioner speech. Thanks for now.